We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Richard Johnson. I'm Alex Kirshner. The two of us are with you today, our dear listeners, to continue our Offseason Vibe Check series with two conference groups, or one conference and one not a conference, which together don't have that many teams, but are still in FBS and still demand to be talked about. That's right, the Pac-12 and the Independents. I love independent season, Richard. We're an independent podcast. We support independent college football programs.
Yeah, it's a manageable number of teams between the Pac-2 and the independent triad that we still have in college football. It's important. It's a nice palate cleanser after, an 18-team Big Ten episode, for instance.
Yeah, it is kind of nice to be able to do an off-season vibe check that does not require you to do 18 teams, because that reminds you that these conferences are too big. But two, definitely not too big. And three independents, well, that actually might be too small. I would say that it's gotten a lot harder to be an independent in college football. And we are soon to be down to exactly two, because one of the remaining three out of Notre Dame, UConn, and UMass is not going to be for very long.
And it ain't Notre Dame.
No, it ain't Notre Dame. Also, sorry, anyone in the Big Ten headquarters who's listening to this and was hopeful that we would be talking about Notre Dame. The situation for the Pac-12 right now is also in flux in terms of how many teams are going to be in this conference. They just had the weirdest season in conference history for any league, obviously, with Oregon State and Washington State being the entire league. They're going to have one more season like that. The Pac-12 is going to be reconstituted, but not until 2026, which is when Boise State and Colorado State and Fresno State and San Diego State and Utah State are going to come aboard. Damn, that's a lot of states. So that is not an active move for the coming season, which means we've got one more year where Wazoo, Oregon State is the undisputed game of the year in the Pac-12.
Games. They're playing twice.
They're playing twice this year.
Yes, they're playing
twice.
Thank you.
My goodness. We've seen this a few times, usually in circumstances like this where schools are having a hard time getting games. The reason why Oregon State and Washington State are having a hard time getting games is because last year they struck up this sort of ad hoc scheduling agreement with the Mountain West so that they could fill their schedules after the Pac-12 schools left them on pretty short notice. That has fallen apart because those conferences have been fighting legally. It sounds like they're going to resolve this and there's just going to be some money changing hands. The Pac-12 agreed when it struck up that scheduling agreement to pay a little bit more money if it poached some, but not all, of the Mountain West schools. It then did that, but now they're fighting anyway. We'll see where that unfolds. But in 2 seasons, you're going to have a bigger Pac-12. You're going to have probably a smaller Mountain West. For now, we're going to have Oregon State, Washington State continuing to exist as the most powerful conference members in history, running the entire governance of the Pac-12 in probably consultation with the incoming members. And they're also going to play these very scattershot football schedules this year. Perhaps, Richard, we should start with the Oregon State Beavers. How is the offseason going aside from being half of a conference that is fighting to expand, fighting for its life and realignment?
I had sort of understated how much the back half of their season tanked. I mean, they lost out in the back half of their season. It was pretty ugly.
Well, yeah, they did beat Washington State
for the conference title, of course.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's a lot of turnover when I look at it. On offense, at least. They do bring much of the defense back, but it was sort of a lost season for them on offense. Anyway, Jam Griffin gets hurt about halfway through the season. They ended up playing like 3 quarterbacks during the season, one of whom is not going to be back because Malik Murphy is in. There's your portal shout. Malik Murphy in from Duke. Murphy, I think, obviously Duke overachieved last season, but I think that they wanted to go in a different direction with their offense. Obviously, they had a Darian Mensah. They wanted somebody who could throw a little bit better than Murphy could, so Murphy moved on. So Murphy is in at Oregon State as their presumed starting quarterback. He will be behind at least 3 new offensive line starters next season. And I do say at least because they may end up turning over that whole offensive line, also have a new offensive line coach. So that entire room protection quarterback is going to be different. Obviously, like I said, Jam Griffin hurt, new running back in, and Darius Clemens had something of a lost season as well. He came in from Michigan last season, got hurt at wide receiver, and then ended up playing the back half of the season. So it's a lot of turnover for Oregon State on offense, and so that I think for them is going to be the main story this spring for them.
They do have quite a bit coming back on their defense this year, which is a nice change of pace and maybe a cause for optimism because Trent Bray, the head coach, majors on that side of the ball. They fielded some really, really solid defenses like the last 2 or 3 years under Jonathan Smith before he went to Michigan State. And then at this time last year, Oregon State's roster was basically in a fire drill. I mean, to say there was nothing left in the cupboard would only be a slight exaggeration. And some of the players who they were excited about, like Jim Griffin, who you mentioned, wound up getting hurt once the games actually started getting played. So I think this year, you're right that there's a lot of turnover, but these things are relative. And I think Oregon State has a chance to have something resembling continuity this year, at least on defense. And that's more of a foundation than they had last year, which is the direction you want to be going in. Like, it was impossible for them to have any continuity last year. I mean, the program basically got hit with the college football equivalent of an earthquake over a period of a few months, and it yielded what it yielded. And I feel a little bit more optimistic about them this year.
So Wazoo, the other side of the league, obviously, as you mentioned, the losers of the conference not awarded the conference championship because they lost. The most intriguing thing to me about Washington State is what Washington State is doing at quarterback.
Yeah, what Washington State is doing at quarterback is the thing that I sort of suspected they were going to do last year. If you'll remember, when we sat down to record, longtime listeners, the Pac-12 preview last year, I thought even in August that they were going to be going with Zevi Eckhouse, who is this really good FCS quarterback at Bryant, who had transferred over there, and kind of figured that he would be the guy who would wind up replacing Cam Ward, in part because of the success that they had with Cam Ward, who was an FCS transfer when he got to Wazoo before going to Miami. It does seem this year probably like Zevi, who played in their bowl game and played well, is going to be the guy for Washington State. So that's good. You have a quarterback who you felt good enough to go out and get and who's won games before at a competitive level of college football. I think the problem here, Richard, the fear is that Washington State might be having the situation otherwise that Oregon State had last year, where Wazoo kind of avoided everything falling apart last year in the way that Oregon State did in the offseason when the Pac-12 disintegrates and the coach leaves. But this year, more or less the same thing happens to Washington State. So last year, they kept some notable players. They kept Kyle Williams at wide receiver. You have a really good quarterback, developmental guy in John Mateer, who turns out to be a really good player for them. Now, Mateer goes. He's at Oklahoma. The offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, goes to Oklahoma preceding that. And then the head man, Jake Dickert, goes to Wake Forest reasonably late in the coaching cycle as well, after Dave Clawson steps down from that job.
I would, to Dickert's credit, I wouldn't say that was late. I mean, that's pretty normal.
No, not especially late. It wasn't like a summer thing or anything. It was just a slightly later into the winter than most of these go down. But I don't blame anybody for that. Now, you have Jimmy Rogers in from South Dakota State, head coach, very accomplished, took over for the legacy coach at South Dakota State after they won the first of those back-to-back titles a couple years ago. 2023, Rogers comes in, wins another title. He has been a very well-regarded FCS coordinator, an FCS coordinator of the year a couple years back, still just 38 years old, very qualified, very solid hire to make. They did get just beat to hell in the portal. That a lot of good players out. Dickert took 8 of them to Wake Forest, mentioned Mateer, the big guy, to Oklahoma. It's a complete wipeout of your favorite Washington State players that you remember from the last couple of years. At least 16 guys are coming with Rogers from South Dakota State. That's encouraging. South Dakota State's a great program. They've won a ton of games and championships in FCS. These are guys that you have to think he knows can play and who led practically a dynasty run for an FCS program. So there have been worse starting points than that, and a quarterback who they felt good about when they brought him up from Bryant a couple years ago. But it does strike me that if Washington State is going to be good this year, it's going to be good because of a ton of FCS transfers working out. And that could be the case. I'm an optimist about transfers up more than I am guys who didn't work out and decided to transfer down. But sort of like Oregon State last year, we are blank slating this for Wazoo. And I guess we'll have to see where the buzz is come fall camp. And more than that, once toe actually meets leather.
When you pull up a Washington State depth chart, it's like at running back, there's like 5 backs and they're all or. Like they do. I mean, they are just building the plane right now.
They are, by the way, 134th out of 136 in Bill Connolly's returning production projections at ESPN this spring. So
tough.
It's great that Bill does this because it gives you sort of an empirical way to say, damn, they've lost a lot. Yeah, they've lost a ton. I mean, this is as close to a complete restart as you're going to see in college football.
You do wonder if that's an April portal spot for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Like if they're going to be buyers in the April portal.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially because Jimmy Rogers comes to Washington State, like I said, a little bit late in the cycle. This hiring gets done December 28th. It's announced by Washington State. The portal window is just about wrapped at that point. And you have guys who can leave because you have a head coaching change. But I agree. It's a spot where you would think that you would want to go shopping in April and see if you can round out your first year roster a little bit. Richard, that's the Pac-12. That was pretty quick.
Yes, very quick. All right, Pac-12 is over. Time for podcast business.
Richard, independent podcast. Time to preview the offseason, recap the offseason of sorts for the independent FBS teams. Let's start with the Connecticut Huskies.
Yeah, 8-4 in the regular season. Bowl win over a coachless UNC because that bowl win confirms our priors that Jim Moore is doing a pretty good job and they had a pretty good season. We are counting it. Put it on the board. They won the Fenway Bowl. It matters. Jim Mora has been bragging about the fact that they went 8-0 against G5 teams. They are the third team out of 3 last season to do that. So hang it up on the board. Elsewhere in UConn's offseason, they also extended Jim Mora as well, which matters. He's their only post Randy Edsall success since they went to the Fiesta Bowl, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, you
including Randy Edsall.
Yeah. You can't look at anything Jim Moore has done and say, and not say he's done a great job at UConn for what they wanted and what they needed. This is a 1-11 team or 2-10 team a few years ago. Awful. 12-man signing class, but a 20-man portal class, which I think is interesting. Heavy on the secondary as well was UConn. And they went with your favored FCS portal strategy to FCS guy. A lot of FCS guys up. There's some Central Connecticut State. There's some Lafayette in there. There's some guys coming up to the next level.
UConn obviously could go 0-12 or 1-11 or 2-10 in any given year. But I do think it's worth pointing out that what they're doing right now is pretty much what I think we would agree is the best case scenario for what UConn football can be if it's going to continue to play FBS football, which it is. They have very little interest that I can surmise in dropping down. Like, to go out there and win 9 games last year, 2 years after a 6-7, and to be bowl eligible twice in 3 years is like, I'm going to talk about UMass in a second. And when we say like, what could you be? Like, what is the best thing that is reasonable to hope for? UConn's kind of doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long that will last. That's not a prediction of anything year to year, especially because of the kind of overhaul that you just talked about. I mean, we're going to have to see what they look like, but it's something. And I think you have to maybe begrudgingly give a little bit of credit to Jim Mora for the fact that they are not terrible, or at least that 2 out of the last 3 years, they have not been terrible. And even their bad year, and there was a 3-9. There's a lot of 3-9 teams. UMass, Richard, kind of interesting right now, actually. More interesting than I think they've been in a little while. They have a new coach, Joe Harasimiak. He spent the last 3 years as the defensive coordinator at Rutgers. Had some very solid units there. You may remember them winning some games at the beginning of 2024. They stuffed Virginia Tech into a locker in Blacksburg last September. Pretty solid. They've outpunched their recruiting rankings over those years. Before that, though, he was a very successful FCS head coach at Maine. Now, does being a successful FCS coach in New England have anything to do with being a good FBS UMass coach in this day and age? I would argue no. And the proof of that is Don Brown and Mark Whipple, who were literally good UMass, not just New England, but UMass FCS coaches, and could not make it shake in the way that UMass exists now. But I think this is their most creative hire that they've made in a little while. Whipple and Brown, again, were just sort of playing the hits, guys who had been successful there when this was a completely different program and a different station in the sport. Walt Bell was on my draft list when we did the draft with Godfrey and Roger Sherman of the worst hires of the last 15 years, because he just made no sense from either a fit or a track record of doing better than your recruiting rankings with the talent you have perspective. But now you get a guy who has done that, who has punched above his weight on the field with the players he has. He has built a winning FCS team at Maine where there are basically no good high school football players. And he's had 3 seasons with top 40 defenses at Rutgers and 1 top 20 in there. Does that mean this is going to work? Obviously not. There's no reason UMass ever has to work, and it could just continue to be bad. But I think I see more of a fighting chance with this concept of a hire than I would have seen if they just went and got some old UMass guy again, or some like hotshot play caller who hasn't actually called very good plays for a long time, which was the case with Walt Bell.
Yeah, I think we all know the deal with UMass. We all know the score. Difficult, hard, one of the harder jobs, one of the tougher roads to hoe. At least outside of the MAC, it doesn't get much more difficult.
Speaking of the MAC, UMass is on its way to the MAC, so that's going to happen this year. We have been, in the offseason vibe checks, we've just been classifying these teams by where they were last year. Creative decision because we're doing offseason. It's between 2 seasons, and they're technically still members of the independent world. But they're going to the MAC this summer. They played a few years in the MAC much earlier in their history, earlier in this century. I think in one way, this move is slightly a bummer, which is basically basketball. Their basketball team has not been good in a while, but you would rather be in the A10, which they are, than in the MAC for basketball. I think they just probably felt like they could not be an independent forever. Matt Brown did some reporting on this last spring for Extra Points, talking to their athletic director. It's just not an easy budgetary place to be as an Indy, especially where they're located and with the travel that is demanded of most of their teams because of the lack of good games sort of right around them at Amherst. They already played 5 MAC games on their schedule last year. Now they're going to go up to 8. They will also, of course, go and get body bagged and guarantee games. I don't have that strong a view of whether UMass is better off for football in the MAC. My thought is it would be hard to be much worse off than they've been. So sure, go and give it a shot. But, to the extent that there are traveling UMass football fans, and there are some who are kind of your diehards, this will make it harder for them to go and see the team play more regularly. And I guess that's something that you would like to avoid if you could. I understand why they don't think they could.
Yeah. All right. To the big one. The big independent, and I use independent in air quotes, as we all know, because a team who plays 5 scheduled games and 3 permanent rivalries is not actually an independent, but is basically an independent in sheep's clothing. It's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, your friends and mine. We head into this offseason Notre Dame at an interesting spot. The question spots for Notre Dame, for me, that they've addressed are defensive line and wide receiver. At wide receiver, they bring in, from Virginia, Malachi Fields. You may remember him as the other receiver in the mix there. Malik Washington, the other receiver this season that Virginia went nuts 2 years ago. So Fields comes in at wideout. Obviously, we know what Notre Dame has been at wideout pretty much since Chase Claypool has left. The other thing is at defensive line. What is Notre Dame going to do to replace Riley Mills and Howard Cross, really the engines of that defense? Transfer Elijah Hughes from USC, transfer Jared Dawson from Louisville come in. So we're going to see if those guys can step up. Obviously, Notre Dame had guys, Gabriel Rubio, Donovan Nish, who stepped in, who played, Jordan Botello on the edge there, could play. You don't get to the national championship without the amount of depth. Remember, depth was the main storyline with Notre Dame this season because they had all those injuries at so many times. But then you go back to the DB, like Jordan Clark's gone, Xavier Watts gone, Benjamin Morrison, gone. Like you start to dig down and you're like, all right, are they recruiting at a high enough level to continue with this depth? They did bring in Devontae Smith from Alabama, the other Devontae Smith at Alabama. They brought him in as a transfer as well on the back end as a DB. So, all right, let's see what we got here, Notre Dame. I think Marcus Freeman has recruited at a high enough level to reload, but I'm not all the way sure. And this is going to be the stress test this year.
Yeah, I think that their class this year, their like incoming prep class, is a more typical Brian Kelly Notre Dame class. It's ranked 12th nationally in high schoolers. Last year they had a slightly stronger one by the ratings agencies that the 24/7 Sports Composite had 9th. That's the one that you would look at most closely in terms of guys who might step up to make contributions this year, either as sophomores or redshirt freshmen. I do think it's interesting that most of Notre Dame's contributors on this team last year, with the exception of the quarterback, Riley Leonard, who was a one and out, are guys who were in that program for, up to like 6 years in the case of Howard Cross before they became fully formed monsters. Like Notre Dame does business just a little bit differently than most of the, I would say even than like more than half of the teams that made the playoffs last year in terms of their developmental approach sort of being the old way. And so that makes me worry a little bit less than I would otherwise, given how much they've lost, particularly on offense. Like, I think they have some developmental credibility, and we know it because year after year, you have guys in their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th years in the program who are becoming good contributors for them.
And you have that offensive line, guys who are able to step up early and play. Charles Jagasaw, Anthony Knapp, like guys who are able to step up and play in very big games, obviously, and be main contributors. I know Bryce Young is the, I don't know what the Alabama names thing that Notre Dame has going on. Bryce Young was a 5-star defensive lineman that signed in 2024. So he obviously, you'd imagine, is going to be a key contributor for them this year, kind of stepping into that mold. And that's where Notre Dame gets to be in a reload phase rather than just rather than stepping back for it. That's where you want to be. That's where, the teams in the station of Notre Dame's, the teams in Notre Dame's station of the sport are, or where Notre Dame purports themselves to be. The quarterback thing is also going to be interesting, Alex.
Yes, it is. Notre Dame apparently had a pretty sincere 3-man quarterback competition going on in the spring. There was Steve Angeli, who was the backup last year to Riley Leonard, who you saw in the Orange Bowl, who played pretty well in that game, gave him a decent chance to win that game. And they did win that game after Riley Leonard came back in. And there's CJ Carr, who is Lloyd Carr's grandson, who was very hyped, came in a year ago, was hurt, didn't really have much of a factor in that season that they just had, but now we're going to see him. And Kenny Minchie is in this mix as well. Angeli transferred after spring, so I guess he's the loser in that battle, at least the first loser in that battle. He goes to Syracuse, where they got a nice little track record under Fran Brown so far with Kyle McCord of making it work with portal quarterbacks who didn't win battles or didn't want to be in battles elsewhere. And you've got, and then they're actually going to see him, I should note, when Syracuse plays Notre Dame this year. And then they also still have Carr and Minchie. And so we don't know. I think Carr is like the kind of archetypal, highly touted blue chip guy, comes in and waits a year and then maybe takes the job. And if he develops the way that they hope he will, then this guy could be the next really good Notre Dame quarterback. So we're going to see. They got a couple of options and they've built some credibility. I think that they can figure things out at this position.
Yeah, it's Notre Dame, so when the schedule comes around, it will come thick and fast, and you better be ready. Obviously you could take a loss early on, a very dumb loss early on. That's what they did last year, and still were able to rebound for it. But yeah, the quarterback thing is going to be fascinating, how that's managed and what happens. Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a good old like a Tommy Rees situation with two quarterbacks, but we'll see how Notre Dame's able to manage that.
Their most interesting portal guy, Richard, might be the defensive tackle from Notre Dame, or excuse me, from Louisville. Goodness gracious, to Notre Dame. That's Jared Dawson. You already talked about the two who they're losing. They lost Riley Mills in the first round of the playoff, and they felt that as the playoff went on last year. Sometimes you can hit on these defensive tackle transfers, like Texas did last year with a couple of guys, and that helped them round out a really elite defensive front in general. So that's the goal for Notre Dame. I guess they determined that they didn't quite have enough in the stable developmentally behind those two departing tackles to keep the caliber of play that they've liked there. Go into Louisville, get someone in here. We'll see how it goes.
All right. Have we satiated the independent need?
Yeah, it's an offseason vibe check. I guess the other Notre Dame piece, Richard, of any offseason vibe check, anytime you're talking about talking season with Notre Dame, is that, as you alluded to, they are still independent.
It's not changing. It's not
changing. I just think it's notable to check back in on this, that the ACC had its big legal issue with Florida State and Clemson resolved, and the ACC did not successfully persuade Notre Dame to join the conference to stabilize it in the course of that. Obviously, Notre Dame has resisted, I don't know if I would say overtures, but sort of wishes into the wind from the Big Ten. Yeah, it ain't changing. I feel like they're an independent for a long time to come.
Yeah, and remember, Notre Dame also has legitimate sway over the college football playoff. So to the extent that playoff debate still is occurring, Notre Dame sits as the 11th seat on the college football playoff, both management and, well.
Yeah, honestly, still kind of crazy that was allowed, but hey,
absolutely insane.
I mean, really wild that was allowed. That is an anti-establishment thing that I will perfectly be happy to play ball with. I mean, ridiculous that exists, but it does exist, and I guess it's not changing. So, hey, congrats to Notre Dame. Tremendous deal. This episode comes to you with the support of our paid subscribers who make it all possible, and just a couple of advertising partners who have been supporting Split Zone Duo for years. We thank them for being part of what we do. Nokian Tires is very committed to safety and to reliability. These are things that we talk about a lot, but it's also a leader in sustainability. Its tires are low rolling resistance. That means lower emissions, better fuel mileage. Its factory in Tennessee was the first tire facility in the world to earn LEED V4 Silver certification. And Nokian Tires is even supporting efforts to protect a highly endangered fish in the streams near its factory in Southeast Tennessee. Listeners of this show, we think, are thoughtful consumers driven by their values. Nokian Tires strives to be the same, a thoughtful manufacturer that responds to the needs of the environment, not just to its customers. You can learn more about that at Nokian Tires, that's tireswithY.com/sustainability. I also want to direct you to homefieldapparel.com. Homefield has been with SCD from the start. We have grown together, though sometimes lately, I'll tell you, I felt like I've wanted to shrink together. I go between sizes. Lately, I've been wanting to size down a bit. Got a lot going on. In addition to being the defending heavyweight champ in college sports apparel, Homefield now literally offers, I made this up myself, a bunch of heavyweight tees and also many different varieties of outerwear so you can look good, feel good, play good as you root for the school that you love. The website is homefieldapparel.com. The promo code is SZD20. That's SCD20 for 20% off your first order. And with that, it is our privilege to introduce a whole nother special part of this episode. I'm going to talk with a longtime friend of the show, the author Victoria Zeller, about not just her new book, but the fascinating state of modern special teamer development coming out of high school and into college football. There's a lot to talk about there, and it's relevant to this book. We'll tell you about it. It's a fun talk. We will roll it for you right now. Here we are. We are joined by sports writer, author, and woman about the internet, Victoria Zeller. You might have read her writing at Defector, or you might have come across her college football or Buffalo Bills and NFL postings on X or on Blue Sky, where she goes by @dirtbagqueer. That's not her given name, though. You might have heard her on the Shutdown Fullcast or the Tuck Rule. And she's the author of a new book. It's called One of the Boys. I'm excited to ask about it, as well as talk about other college football topics of the moment. Welcome, Victoria.
Hello, Alex. Thank you for having me. I've been a fan of Split Zone Duo since literally week one, probably all the way back in the pandemic season. So yeah, I could not be more excited.
Yeah, you are a true friend of the show. It was we finally met in real life at the live show that we did with the Shutdown Fullcast back in January. That was a pleasure. you've got this book coming out. Very excited about it. But you and I have also talked on and off for years, really, in like DM format about little football things that we've noticed or shit that we can talk about, various things and people across college football. We both, I would say, fancy ourselves connoisseurs of, special teams thoughts. And
I like to imagine so.
Yeah, it's what you want to be known as. And I wrote something a few years back that you gave me some interesting feedback on about why NFL teams seem unable to stop rostering long snappers on their 53s. And I know you have a lot of thoughts about like how special teamers are developed today. And this is quite interesting because in your new book, which is a young adult novel, it's a coming of age story that's about a whole lot of things that we'll talk about. It's also like very much about the development of high school kickers coming into college football. Like this is like a significant through line throughout this book. Why?
Man, why? So, in terms of like how I arrived at this, it kind of develops organically. Well, I guess first of all, premise of this book is that we have high school senior Grace, who is returning to her high school football team that she previously quit when she came out as trans. She's a really good kicker, and her teammates could use the help making a push for a state title. The way that I've sort of like pitched it to people on both people who know sports and people who don't know sports is trans coming of age, kind of like crossed with Friday Night Lights. I wanted to tell a like pretty traditional high school football story, but through like a very outsider lens. And you could say that the outsider lens is as a kicker, but also as a trans girl, as Grace is. And just sort of like taking this like very different angle on what it means to like win state and get the scholarship and get the girl in the end, like playing with all that.
American dream.
As for how this ended up being a special teams story, it's kind of complicated because like I've always been fascinated with kicking as a like weird psychological torture that's like stapled on to the rest of football. Like it's this like weird golfing mini game that like really only tangentially has anything to do with like what happens whenever the offense and defense are on the field. It is football's like vestigial tale almost. And I'm just very interested in the like psychology of kicking, in the kinds of pressures that it puts on people. But sort of research for this book is what kind of like led me down the path of doing a lot of research about what it looks like to be a high school kicker who is like top 20 in her graduating class, I think is where I ended up on that. And what it looks like to have a very particular, weird, specialized skill set on a football field. In the podcast document, I put this image that went around college football Twitter years ago of Miami kicker Bubba Baja. This is from 2018. He's a true freshman kicker. I'm pretty sure this mostly went around because his name is Bubba Baja, but also because the graphic says made 4 of 10 field goals as a high school senior.
Yes.
And like seeing this even in like 2018 when I was in college, I was like, how the hell do you go from making 4 of 10 field goals as a high school senior to being a true freshman kicker for Miami the next year?
And one who made 9 of 12 that year and made 45 of 46 extra points. Clearly, someone taught him how to kick between the time that he really couldn't do it when he was a high school senior and when he was a true freshman at Miami. Interesting there.
Yeah, and especially if you look into it, Bubba Baja was the 6th nationally ranked kicker according to I think I was looking at the 247 kicking rankings. I think he's lower in the 247 composite, but like, how do you end up being 6th nationally ranked as a kicker if you go 4 for 10 as a high school senior? Just like very, very like fascinated in like specialist development. That moment kind of plants the seed, and then having this idea for the book kind of is how I ended up falling down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's interesting. You call it psychological torture, the act of kicking. And, I thought that I read this book and I really enjoyed it, and you should pre-order the book. Give us the release date again.
May 13th. So that's 2 days.
May 13th.
So that's 2 weeks from the day that we're recording this.
Yes, pre-order. Look for it on May 13th. It's called One of the Boys. But I think one of the defining like threads of this book is that Grace, our protagonist in the book, is sort of living two lonely lives because she's trans, has recently transitioned, and also is a kicker. And I'm not going to say that, all kickers are trans, but, there's, it seems like you were trying to draw a little bit of a line there about like the kind of peripheral existence that can happen when you are like coming out as trans or when you are a kicker. Did I badly misread the book?
No, you are definitely on it there. That was definitely something that I was not intending on pulling on when I first started writing this book, but definitely ended up becoming a thread that I found very interesting to pull on as I started to play with what Grace's role on the team was. I was not a kicker in high school. I was a defensive lineman, but I asked several people who did kick in high school what their practice was like, and it's literally I'm on a separate field and I kick for a little bit. Maybe there's a coach supervising me, maybe not. Maybe I have a teammate shagging kicks for me, maybe not. And I do that until I get told to stop doing that, and then I just go stand on the sideline. You're straight up you're on the team, but you have your own weird, totally separate practice regimen. There's obviously lots of people will say that kickers and punters aren't football players, and I definitely wanted to pull on all of that when I was making a trans football story. Is I have this one way that she's otherized, and I have this other way, which is that she's a kicker, and the kicker is always otherized on a football team. The kicker is always, everyone loves the kicker when they make the kick, and everyone hates the kicker when they miss the kick.
Yeah. And it also seems, and this is a thing that you write about at length in the book, and you're sort of talking about it there, that not only is it you're kind of culturally the other as the kicker, but literally because of the way football practice is organized, you're the other. And this is interesting. If you're the kicker, you got to go to practice, right? You have to show up. You don't just get to take off between Saturday and Saturday, or Friday and Friday, or Sunday and Sunday. But, you're on your own, and you're on your own. Typically, the kicker, the punter, the long snapper, and someone in that group is also the holder, typically. And so you're sort of just not even part of the team. You're in the locker room, but your unit is 3 or 4 people, and that's it. And I was kind of shocked to learn a couple years back that even in the NFL, a bunch of teams don't have kicking coaches. It's this experience that you write about in the book where, Grace has a kicking coach who's this old guy who is kind of on the periphery and doesn't even really help that much, or maybe he does sometimes.
I'm going to defend Rhodes. I'm going to defend Coach Rhodes. Coach Rhodes knows what he's doing. Honestly, probably the most unrealistic thing about this book is that the high school football team, Pageland Druids, I called them the Druids, which is a shutdown full cast joke.
Of course.
They actually do have a special teams coach on the staff. He mentions that he coached, I don't know if I specifically said it, but I imagine that he coached D2 ball somewhere. Sure. He's 70 now, and he's moved up north to be closer to his kids or whatever. So he's just helping out at a high school part-time, and the vast majority of high schools in this country have no coaches who know anything about kicking. It's one thing to be a head coach and understand kickoff coverage, punt coverage, whatever. But actual kicking mechanics is something that is just not something that a lot of these young developing kickers can ever touch. At least not through their schools. There are other ways you get that knowledge, which we'll talk about later. So in terms of unrealistic things in this book, it's that Grace has a coach at our high school who actually knows ball, and 2, that there is a MAC school that plays a game on Saturday in November, which I didn't even realize until the book was done, and I was shit.
No, I think this happens. This
happens sometimes.
And your book doesn't have to be set to any television deal. I was impressed that the level of detail in terms of scheduling of football events in this book. You've got a college recruiter who comes to talk to Grace, though doesn't realize at first that she is now Grace, but comes to recruit the kicker and is in town because their FBS transitioning school is playing the University at Buffalo. And this is during the time of year when there's like scrimmages for high school football teams. And, it all scans very well. This is probably the first fiction book that the University at Buffalo football program has ever had a tangential role in as well.
Probably, I would say so.
There's a lot of like cool world building that you do here. And like you can tell when you're reading the book that you are a college football fan, also an NFL fan. I know the Buffalo Bills are sort of your first love, which I'm sorry about or happy about. You have fun.
It's great right now. It's great right now.
How'd you decide how to name the fictional FBS school that was in here?
Yeah, so
because you had to do that. This was part of it because our kicker is getting recruited.
Yes. So Grace, in her like junior year, she's getting recruited by like Penn State and like other sort of like Northeast, Midwest colleges. But now that she's trans, she has this chance meeting with a like special teams assistant named Coach Metellus, who works for a fictional MAC school called Saxon Valley, UW Saxon Valley. And I had the town name already from something that I wrote in college. And I knew that I wanted this school to be a like MAC school. At first I was like, maybe it should be like a fictional FCS school, maybe not. So I decided to have it be a like new program rising up to the MAC. And it was interesting. I knew that I wanted this school called Saxon Valley, and I knew that I wanted it to be in Wisconsin. Like there aren't.
They
any
should have a MAC school.
schools.
They should have one. Yeah,
totally. I was looking into football programs in the state of Wisconsin and seeing that most of them, it's like Wisconsin, and then it's a whole bunch of like D2 and D3 schools. Like I don't even think there's any FCS programs in Wisconsin. So
yeah, it's a lot of the lower level UWs. Yeah.
So I ended up doing some research into the UW college system in order to like integrate my school into it. Because I knew that I wanted it to be a like big public who had recently, for whatever reason, come into booster money. Maybe I don't know why, but
they're on their like Sacramento State arc,
exactly,
or what Sacramento State is trying to do.
Totally, they have this like kind of shitty Sean McVay acolyte head coach who is the kind of guy who would probably talk about like disrupting MAC football. So like, it was world building fictional schools is like something that I would always do in the like old college football games of like, ooh, I'm going to go into
this is like team builder, but in a novel.
Yes, team builder. Yeah. I could not tell you because when I started writing this, it was 2021 and there was no sign of a college football video game on the horizon, and team builder for the old college football game was offline and dead. So like when I found out that like, oh, there's a new college football game coming out and it has team builder, I was like, let's go.
Yes.
So I got to make several schools from this universe, including UW Saxon Valley.
And the journey that our kicker takes to this school, interesting, and I think is like scattered with little bits of wisdom about recruiting, about like kicker development. One of the things that I thought was an interesting subplot in the book, and you get to it pretty early on, is that I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but I think this is early. It's not going to ruin anyone's experience with the book. Is that Grace has transitioned and like left the team, which is unfortunate but seems real that she would feel like she has to do that when she transitions. And so they're trying to find like an emergency kicker to replace this like legendary high school kicker who is no longer on the team. And so they take one of your protagonist's friends and just say, hey, you're the kicker now. Because this kid has played in like all three phases for them before. And they kind of consider him like the jack of all trades of the team. So they say, all right, you're going to try kicking. And they basically give him no help, even though there's this older guy, this coach who has some ball knowing qualities around kicker. That struck me as like probably extremely real. Yeah. There are some high school football teams, I'm sure, that have multiple kickers who that is their official position. You get the kid who mostly kicks on JV, who probably dresses out for the varsity games and who could maybe come and kick. But on a lot of high school teams, you have between 0 and 1 proper kicker. And yet you just tell this kid, hey, like, get the fuck out there. Good luck. Hope
Figure
you can do it.
Man.
And it's this sort of sink or swim that seems like massively unfair to anyone who is willing to try it, but is like a real part of your book. And I wonder if that's what you're talking about when you talk about kicking being psychological torture.
Yeah, the side character who I put through this is a very sweet boy named Caden who is in like AP classes and he plays offense and defense and he's a teenage father and he has a preposterous amount of things on his plate and then the football team is like, "Hey, we need a kicker and we tried out a bunch of the soccer team bozos and none of them can hack it. You got to get out there, man." And
right. Notable that you point out that the soccer team went for tryouts and none of them were good because it doesn't work that way.
I mean, it definitely can sometimes. Like varsity football teams love to try and like pull soccer players over. My friend Siobhan, who was the kicker on my high school football team and also turned out to be trans, and who is a Split Zone Duo subscriber.
Shout out Siobhan, thank you.
She was a soccer player who ended up getting like, I think she was a goalkeeper. She ended up getting pulled over and onto the football team. Okay. So that is very common, but it really does not always work. So yeah, kicking just kind of falls on the head of this poor put upon boy, which is like really common across like high school football. Granted, in a lot of high school football, there isn't really that much need to have a super specialized kicker because you just need someone who can handle kickoffs and then like you need someone who can just like kick the ball really far on kickoff, but you can always go for it if you score a touchdown. You can always just go for 2. You can choose to go for it on fourth down most of the time.
Yeah, you're not kicking a lot of 35-yard field goals in most high school games.
Definitely not. Football, the institution frequently wrongs specialists by like putting them in really bad situations and putting way too much on their shoulders. And without spoiling how the first act of this book goes, it doesn't end well for Caden and his tenure as the kicker of this football team in terms of like, okay, we like the team is like, well, we need the genuine article here. Like, we need an actual like kicking badass because this is not working.
So this thing that you get at about the loneliness of being a kicker, about the neglect of kickers and the neglect of specialists has always kind of animated me, which I know you know because you listen. Like, I used to not find it very appealing how Mike Leach would talk shit about his kickers and like advocate for and actually successfully have open tryouts in one case to like bring a new kicker onto Texas Tech. I didn't like it when Kenny Dillingham was dumping on his kicker last year after the kicker helped them lose a game in Cincinnati, because my next question is, did you help him at all? Like, did you coach him at all? And at the vast majority of FBS programs, I'm pretty comfortable saying that the answer is not really. You have a special teams coach, but that special teams coach isn't necessarily most of the time. Might know more than you or me, but is not like a kicking or punting specialist. His job is to cover kickoffs and cover punts and make sure punts don't get blocked.
Less FBS coaches have full-time dedicated special teams coaches than you would think. And like practically none of them have like kicking coaches.
Yeah. And a lot of the special teams coaches are also like linebackers or something. I remember this got Scott Frost into a lot of hot water his last few years at Nebraska because their special teams were farcical and they didn't have a guy whose explicit job was special teams.
Yeah.
Sole job.
And like, this isn't even just a college football thing. You have, gosh, I don't remember who said it. It was either Kyle Shanahan or Matt LaFleur or one of the members of the Shanahan crime family referred to kickers as independent contractors. Is like, I don't really know what he gets up to.
Yeah.
His job is to come in and kick the football, and that's none of my business. And I'm like, you're leaving so much meat on the bone. Like, I really do think there's a reason why guys like Bill Belichick, who are like special teams freaks and who will happily talk about like long snappers for like 10 minutes. I think there's a reason that those guys end up succeeding as head coaches.
Yeah.
And like, I don't even necessarily mean like guys going from special teams coordinator to head coach, but just like head coaches should take an interest in this stuff because it does matter and it's an edge and your job is to find every single advantage, I think.
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, it's always been strange to me. And I do think that it's caught up in all this like weird football masculinity of like, that's not real football. So why would I know about that? And it's like, it is real football. It's on the field. It's like, like,
Yeah.
just because you don't understand it or you think it's girly because the kicker isn't out there, you know, laying dudes out on every single kickoff doesn't mean that it's not football and doesn't mean that it's not something that you should pay attention to.
Yeah. One of my favorite Mike Tomlin quotes, and there are many, was a couple years ago on a podcast. He was talking about the Super Bowl team that he had early in his Steelers tenure, and he referred to signing a punter off the street as we were doing business with Mitch Berger for those weeks. Like,
that's so good.
Like we got him on a 1099. He came in, did a few projects for us. And yeah, I think that's exactly the same thing. And it's funny, we're talking about good coaches here. Like we're talking about Hall of Fame coaches talking this way. It's interesting, like kind of related. I did this story. This was like maybe 2018 or 2019 where I went to the NFL Combine, which can actually be, if you do it right, like a good media event.
Okay.
And I just asked a bunch of executives and coaches, like, hey, like you guys talk about how versatility is like the key to getting drafted. Like if you ask any wide receiver, you got to be able to play inside, outside. You want tight ends who can play in line or can flex out, or you want slot corners who can play the outside. This goes on at basically every position except quarterback. Like what's more valuable than a reserve offensive lineman who can play guard or tackle?
Yeah.
But you still reserve one of your 53 for a long snapper. And I remember asking like Brett Veach about this. This was before Brett Veach started winning all these Super Bowls, but he's the general manager of the Chiefs. And he was like, well, I could have Travis Kelce do it, but he'd be terrible at it. And and I wouldn't be able to have him practice with the offense. And I need him practicing with Patrick. And it was, it's on the one hand, it does feel like it's this kind of masculine posturing that like, it's just different. But on the other hand, I guess these guys are they're so worried that like, it's almost like out of respect for these jobs that they're like, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah.
I'm not smart enough. You guys do this.
Like specialization in football in the past like 20 years. Like I feel like the last stand for actual players doing specialist things was Tony Romo fumbling that damn hold in that damn playoff game in like 2006 or whatever that was.
Martin Gramatica.
Yes.
Who's, I believe, has a son who's now a kicker, like in FBS, maybe USF or something like that.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Why on earth, and Georgia football, I'm speaking to you because you still do this. Why on earth is the starting quarterback holding kicks? What are you hoping to gain out of this? Like
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Like Georgia still does this. And like college is a whole other can of worms in terms of how they use the holders and kickers and punters, because like a lot of these schools have like 10 specialists on their roster at any given moment, but then they'll still have the like 20th string wide receiver hold kicks for some reason. Like, what are we doing here? But in the NFL, the reason that it's so rigid is that you can't be having the backup quarterback taking practice time to go and hang out with the specialist dorks. Like,
no.
You need
like, in theory, you'd want your best wide receiver to do it. Like, he'll never drop a snap, but he needs to be playing wide receiver. He needs to be, like, learning how to play wide receiver.
Yeah. It's this very interesting thing where, like, NFL teams have the luxury to, like, silo off the, like, very professional 3-man specialist unit. Long snapper, punter, kicker. You go do your thing. And you only worry about your thing, and you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about offense or defense, any of that stuff. In high school and college, it is a lot more complicated. But still, in general, you want specialists doing specialist things, and you don't want to have to worry about cross-training your wide receiver to hold, which is something that happens in my book because it's a high school football team in Western New York, and there's only one specialist on the team. So you have to have the guard long snapping, and you have to have the wide receiver holding. It's this interesting dynamic at the top of the sport, to be sure.
Did you ever think about, when you were creating your story, sending Grace on a pilgrimage to Australia to join a kicking and punting academy and get the proper training that seems to be certainly per capita, the best way to actually get a college football scholarship?
Yeah, so this is the wild thing about specialist recruiting in college is that it's kind of been privatized. The initial question that like sets me down this journey of like, how does Baba Baja kick 40% as a high school senior and then end up as the kicker for the Miami Hurricanes the next year? And the answer is that he went to Cole's kicking camp and he shook lots of hands and he probably really impressed all of the people that he met there. And he ended up getting on the board because that's how it works. In earlier versions of this story, I made mention about Grace going to one of these special teams camps. In the end, I just did not have the space for it in this book. It's already I already have a lot of stuff going on here. So in the end, in terms of other things that are kind of unrealistic, Grace never mentions having gone to one of these Cole's kicking camps, or there are other ones too. There are specialist camps all over the country. There are specialist camps in Australia for punters who want to make that leap.
There's a long snapper guy. America has a long snapper guy. His name's Chris Rubio. He's the long snapper guy. And there's an NFL agent who's the NFL long snapper agent for a lot of these guys too.
It's wild. So I think the reason why, and this is something that we've spoken about, Alex, the reason why specialists, kickers specifically, seem to be getting better is because they are getting better coaching than they ever have. They're just not getting it from their schools. They're not getting it from the youth football programs that they grew up playing in. They're going to these camps and they're getting actual real special teams instructions. And they're probably getting more coaching in one day at a Coles camp than they're actually getting in a whole summer with whoever their high school football coaches are.
I would imagine that's true. I think this is interesting because I had never actually done a macro analysis of this, but I was able to pull some data from Sport Radar, which is a big sports data provider that has the last 9 years of FBS kicking stats. Because we all know it, that NFL kickers, it's been very well covered, have just become cyborgs, and until they break, like Justin Tucker broke in the last year or two, but in more than one way. But you get to college now, even, and in the last 9 years, you have seen a steady creep upwards in the average field goal distance attempted. From in 2016, the average college field goal was the 35-yarder, and in 2024, it was a 37.5-yarder. You've seen, I think, most notably on 50-plus yard field goals. In 2016, college kickers were making 39% from 50-plus, and they're making 54% in 2024. And this is not exactly linear, but it's a very clear line go up and to the right situation as you look at this year over year. So you surmise that there are just, there's enough kicking camps for 134 of these guys to go to them and get better at kicking, that despite the lack of college development of kickers, we're still able to, the lack of high school development of kickers, that's why we're still able to see pretty notable gains for college kickers?
I think so. Yeah. I think, I talk a lot about how this, most recent generation of kickers are just, different than the guys who came before. One of my favorite ways to visualize this is to go to Adam Vinatieri's Pro Football Reference page. Adam Vinatieri made 2 field goals longer than 50 yards in between 2002 and 2011. Two. He made 2 field goals beyond 50 yards. And then after that, in 2016, he made 7. In 2017, when he was 45, he made 5. It's just teams are more confident than ever that their kickers can actually do this, which is part of it is that 20 years ago, 50 plus was a long ass kick. 50 plus was crazy. What are you talking about 50 plus?
Yeah.
And now if you can't hit that, you're gone, man. And I think what must be happening is that it starts with these super elite kicker camps, and then it just slowly trickles upward. But counter argument to that is, who is the best kicker in the NFL right now? Probably you would say Brandon Aubrey. And Brandon Aubrey did not kick a football until he was in his mid-20s. Brandon Aubrey was a tier 2 USFL defender, I think. And he was watching football with his wife, and his wife was I think you could do that. And he was bet, and he did that. And now he's the best kicker in the NFL. So But then on the other hand, you have Will Reichard, who is, I think, entering his 2nd year with the Vikings, maybe his 3rd. And he's been a good professional kicker so far, but he was like number one kicker in his class when he was like 14. And he's just
Yeah.
been like, he went up through camps, number one kicking prospect in his high school class, goes to Bama, and then he's drafted in the 5th round by the Vikings.
Yeah.
So
I fault Will Reichard for a lot of things. Will Reichard is the guy who took a lot of the mystique out of college football because he sort of patched Alabama's gaping hole with kicking. And that's a shame. College football is considerably more fun when Alabama has a kicker who is not reliable.
So true. It's wild because I don't think that as fans we really process how much different the kicking game is now to like 15 or 20 years ago. But like it's like completely different universes. Even 2025 compared to 2015, extremely different. And that's at like all levels of the sport. It's wild. And like I said, I want to fully pin this on elite kicking camps, but then you have guys like Jake Bates, who was a like kickoff specialist, I think at Arkansas, that sounds right, and like didn't kick field goals at all until he got into the USFL, where then in his like first ever game that he was a place kicker, he hits a like 60 plus yard field goal walk off, win the game. And it's like, all right, man, I guess you can do it.
Yeah.
So
he was a soccer player at Central Arkansas.
Damn.
Before that, for a sense of his journey. Not even a high major soccer player, but a UCA soccer player.
Yeah. So you have guys like this, Jake Bates, Brandon Aubrey, and then you have the like kicking robots. You're like Evan McPherson's, your Will Reichard's. I don't really know where we're going with it. Like, I don't know. I feel like a few years ago, I had a good sense that maybe it really felt like 64 yards was like the longest field goal that a human was like capable of like kicking under like normal conditions. Of like, maybe this is just like human biological max is like just around like 65 yards. I have no idea what kind of world we're going to live in a decade. Maybe like...
Yeah, me neither.
When is the first 70-yard field goal going to get kicked? It's going to happen.
I mean, it's going to happen. Yeah. I would be so interested, but I don't even think this is possible. I would love to find out if it is possible to get aggregate high school kicking stats. Nationwide is a pipe dream, but I would honestly love to even just get like versus like kicking stats from like, you know, pick a high Texas division of high school football and see what level of change there's been over the last 10 or 20 years in kicking at the high school level. And maybe it would be more interesting to get it like in Western New York, where your story's set, where it's probably even a little bit less professionalized coaching high school ball than it is in Texas. I strongly suspect that we would not see anything resembling the level of improvement that we have seen in FBS, let alone obviously the NFL, where you're picking from 32 non-representative humans to do this.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll never know. I don't go to many high school football games these days. And so I'm maybe a little underqualified for this, and that's where I should leave it. But I'd love to find out if they're actually kicking any better. My guess is that they're not, but it's just a guess.
I would also be fascinated. It like high school football stats, very hard to come by, very hard to like compile. It's tough. Like in terms of like kicking at the high school level, you can look at the like national recruits and say like, well, we see how these guys kicked, but that's only like, you know, that's only the like Earth's crust of all of high school football. I'm so eager to see where we go with it. I don't like, this feels like one of the like final frontiers of football that we can really push in terms of like,
yeah. And it's easily measurable in theory, you know, like it's easier to measure kicker improvement than it is left tackle improvement.
Yes.
Because there are more variables in the things that a left tackle gets evaluated for than there are for a kicker. Victoria, this was one of my favorite parts of the book. There's a recruiting violation in here. I think you refer to them as Anonymous U, but you describe it as like a pretty big school that wants to recruit our kicker protagonist.
I can literally read this scene. It would probably take like 90 seconds.
Give it to us. This was probably my favorite part of the book, and it's like I'm like the Leo DiCaprio pointing at the screen meme being like, this is my corner of the college football internet. Someone must have created this. Give it to us.
Yeah. So context here is that Grace is holding a hoodie that makes her think about this thing that happened to her last year, which Grace, high school senior, as a high school junior, before she came out when she was a top 20 kicking prospect in the country. So she has, like, recruiters are here. So that's the context. Last October, when I was still a hot college football prospect, an interested program sent their special teams coordinator to visit Pageland. I won't say where he was from. I'm no narc, but the school was big. Out of every coach I'd ever spoken to, this one fed me the most bullshit. I could win the kicking job in my true freshman season. I was the only kicker on their board. That kind of stuff. It was a real full court press. They wanted me bad. While the meeting wound down, the guy mentioned that Coach Rutkowski's office was a little stuffy, so he peeled his anonymous university hoodie off. He balled it up, clutched it in his lap, and at some point let it fall to the floor. Soon the meeting was over, shaking hands all around. You're a really bright young man. We'd love to have you. The usual shtick. And the coach was off to catch a plane that would take him to his next victim. After practice that day, though, Coach Rutkowski called me into his office. Your pal left this on the floor, he said, tossing the hoodie to me. Make sure he gets that back. I stuffed it in my backpack and forgot about it until I got home that night. Then, when I pulled it out of my bag in my room, I noticed he left something in the pocket. I pulled out a wad of cash and stared at it for a solid minute in disbelief, unsure if I should even be touching it lest the recruiting cops immediately descend on my house. Eventually, I counted it. $200 in 10s and 20s in the pocket of a hoodie that had been left for me to find.
Glad you put this in there. Glad it was there.
Yeah, so this is not like a huge plot point, but it's something that I wanted to put in partially because most of the flashbacks we get in this book, and there are several, deal with Grace and her, like, mental illness regarding her transition and the various ways that she's crashing out before she comes to this very big decision in her life. I wanted to sneak a little something in that sort of just, like, shows the kind of shit that was happening when she was, very briefly, this sort of, like, highly sought after national kicking recruit. And it is, as the acknowledgments mention, it is pulled almost word for word from a episode of Split Zone Duo that came out in 2021.
Yes, I did not remember this or notice this when I was reading the passage, but honored. I'm guessing this was a Godfrey thing. He'll be honored.
This is actually a Richard Johnson story.
Wow.
I went back and listened to it last night. This is a great episode of Split Zone Duo. To me, like, the episode of Split Zone Duo. It's titled How Players Get Paid. This came out in February 2021 after the Jeremy Pruitt scandal. So this is like the absolute last moment in which you could tell a story about how college football players get paid and have the answer not be like NIL collectives. Like,
yeah,
what are you talking about? Also, this episode is fascinating because you guys are talking about what college football is going to look like. Like, looking forward, you talk a lot about how, like, are teams just going to be able to, like, build super teams out of transfers? Like, we don't really know. We don't know how the extra, like, COVID year eligibility is going to, like, affect college football going forward.
Badly turned out to be the answer. Poorly,
yeah. So I loved going back to this episode. I think everyone should do it. And it's also quaint in retrospect because it comes out, like, months before NIL is, like, made legal by the NCAA. But the story of a coach leaving cash in a pocket of a hoodie that he leaves in the coach's office, that is something that Richard relays on that episode of Split Zone Duo. And because I was writing this way back in 2021, and, like, the story of how I had to adapt a book that was tangentially about college football that I started writing before NIL was legal to, like, having it, like, come out now is, like, it's, like, a totally different sport. And I had to, like, juggle that and, like, how I wanted to portray the college team in this, or I had to make Grace think about NIL in terms of, like, making her, like, big call of, like, does she actually want to play college football as a out trans kid, which is, like, a fucking nightmare. But one of the things is, like, I get the bag and, like, set myself up. So yeah, I mean, Split Zone Duo was, like, very, very key in terms of me, like, being interested enough in, like, college ball in order to, like, write a story that, like, flirts with the, like, nitty gritty of, like, recruiting and, like, what is this, like, new to FBS program want out of this kid? And what are the reasons why a trans football player might appeal to a program like this is very much comes out of like listening to Split Zone Duo and being very interested in sort of the like behind the scenes business of it all.
Yeah. Honestly, I thought reading it that there's really something to it that every sports team at every competitive level is looking for their new market and efficiency. And I think there'd be like someone like Grace in real life probably is going to be overlooked or just out and out discriminated against because of transphobia. But if you're a smart program and you got someone with a rocket leg, you'd probably be looking in there, right? Isn't that what these guys are all about nowadays? Is without ideological favor, just pick the best candidate. Well, Grace is the best candidate. Grace has a great leg.
She, I mean, her leg is definitely should be kicking somewhere higher than a FBS fringe college. So
does Grace in the postscript? Does Grace get a significant NIL bag like after her junior year and wind up at Penn State or something like that?
I don't want to spoil the various decisions that she makes in this book or how I ended up coming to the conclusion that I did for where her story goes.
It's a really enjoyable book. I am glad that you sent me an advance copy. I'm glad this book exists. Trans people should be in college football, and I'm happy that one is in this book, and that there are people who are like listening to the show, watching the sport, who are. I think it's not just timely, but important, and like a really great story that is relevant for any time, not just this one. So it's very well done. I strongly recommend the book.
Thank you, Alex. The vast majority of my readers so far are not sports enjoyers, because most of the people who have had their hands on advanced copies of my book are book reviewers, bookstore employees, etc., school librarians, etc. So the vast majority of the feedback that I've had on this book so far has been, I don't know anything about football, but I was still able to like get into it and follow the story because of how you wrote it, which is always lovely to hear. And it was very interesting balancing, like, how do I give people who do not care about football just enough for them to be happy to like follow along without feeling like they're getting like crushed, versus how do I tell a sports story that is complex and would be able to like hold the attention of someone who is interested in like weedsy specialist stuff. So like balancing that was fascinating, like a very interesting question, and I'm delighted to talk about the ball side of things here with you.
It's a pleasure. So the book is out on May 13th. We will drop the pre-order link in the show notes. I recommend it. You should check it out. And we'll have to follow not just how the book's going, but also how college kickers are going. We're guessing pretty well. Seems like the line goes up. Victoria Zeller, thanks for coming on Split Zone Duo.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.